fall of the Roman Empire. How did the greatest city in history collapse? Introduction: the Roman Empire was one of the most powerful states in history, from Britain in the west to Persia in the east. From Scandinavia to the deserts of North Africa, Roman influence spanned millions of people, united by a common culture, language, laws, and military force. Rome was the center of civilization. Its roads connected continents. Its army was considered invincible, and its economy was the most developed in the world. However, despite this grandeur, by the 4th century AD, the empire had fallen into a deep crisis, ultimately leading to its collapse in 476 AD. The main question: how did a state that lasted for over 1,000 years become unable to defend itself? Was it a sudden catastrophe or a gradual decline? Who was to blame? Barbarians, emperors, corruption, or simply time itself? Internal causes of the fall: political instability and corruption. In the early period of the Roman Empire, governance was strictly centralized. Emperors such as Octavian Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius ruled with an iron hand, maintaining a balance between the army, the Senate, and the people. However, by the 3rd century, a crisis of power had begun. Emperors came and went at an astonishing speed. Many rulers gained power through conspiracies, military coups, and even by bribing legionnaires. Some emperors ruled for only a few months before being assassinated or overthrown by a new contender. Fact: between 235 and 285 AD, Rome saw over 25 emperors, most of whom met violent deaths. Political instability made the empire vulnerable. Roman generals, more concerned with their own positions than with the defense of the state, weakened the military and financial systems. Economic crisis and the impoverishment of the population. At its peak, Rome's economy thrived on conquests. New territories brought gold, slaves, taxes, and resources. Slave labor made production cheap, allowing the aristocracy to live in luxury. But by the 3rd to 4th centuries, conquests had stopped, which led to the end of the influx of cheap resources, rising taxes to cover military expenses, the ruin of farmers and artisans. Fact: in the late empire, taxes became so burdensome that many Roman citizens voluntarily fled to the barbarians to pay lower taxes. Additionally, Roman currency suffered devaluation. To cover expenses, emperors began diluting silver coins with cheaper metals. As a result, the Roman denarius lost its value, leading to inflation. Spiritual and moral decline. Early Romans were known for their iron discipline and resilience. Their soldiers were ready to die for the state, and citizens took pride in being Roman. Over time, however, patriotism faded. The elite stopped caring about the empire's fate. Entertainment replaced duty. Romans preferred gladiator fights, drinking, and feasting over concern for the state. The army deteriorated. Mercenary barbarians, who had no loyalty to Rome, were recruited into service. Fact: by the 4th century, 70% of the Roman army consisted of barbarian mercenaries who were paid to protect the borders. Many of them later attacked Rome themselves. External factors: barbarian invasions. How did outsiders destroy Rome? For centuries, the Roman Empire was considered invincible. Legions guarded its borders, roads connected vast territories, and emperors believed their rule would last forever. However, in the 4th and 5th centuries, a new threat loomed over Rome: barbarians. They did not come just to plunder and kill, they came to stay. Who were the barbarians? The Romans called all people who did not speak Latin or Greek and lived outside the empire barbarians. These tribes lacked writing, state institutions, or a complex economy, but they possessed the most crucial weapon: military strength. Germanic tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, Franks, Angles, and Saxons had long bordered Rome. Initially, they were its enemies, later its allies, and ultimately its destroyers. On top of that, in the 4th century, The Huns, a nomadic warrior people, began their march from the depths of Asia, striking fear even into the bravest hearts. How did the Huns trigger a chain reaction? Rome's borders had usually withstood barbarian attacks, but something unusual happened in the late 4th century. The Huns began migrating westward from the steppes of Central Asia. The Huns were feared even by the most formidable warriors. They did not build cities, knew no agriculture, but their cavalry was unmatched. They lived in the saddle, fought from childhood, and, most importantly, struck so suddenly that no one had time to prepare for their attacks. When the Huns crossed the Volga, they attacked the Ostrogoths, forcing them to flee. The Ostrogoths pushed the Visigoths westward, and eventually the Visigoths reached the Danube, the eastern border of Rome. The Visigoths requested asylum from the Romans, and Emperor Valens granted them land. However, Roman officials mistreated the newcomers. They sold them food at exorbitant prices, enslaved their women and children, and humiliated and robbed them. The Goths soon had enough. In 378 AD, the Visigoths rebelled and crushed the Roman army at the Battle of Adrianople. This was Rome's first great defeat at the hands of barbarians. Emperor Valens himself was killed, and the legions fled. 410 AD. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths after Adrianople, the Goths realized that the Romans were no longer invincible. Their leader, Alaric, dreamed of securing a place in the Roman Empire, but when his requests for an alliance were rejected, he marched straight to the heart of the empire, the Eternal City. In 410 AD, for the first time in 800 years, the Visigoths stormed Rome. This moment shocked the world. A city that seemed eternal fell to the barbarians. The looting lasted 3 days. Palaces burned, temples were pillaged, and thousands of citizens were killed. Although Rome recovered from this catastrophe, it was clear that this was a mortal blow. 455 AD, the Vandals arrive. If the Goths plundered Rome for 3 days, the Vandals looted it for 2 weeks. The Vandals, another Germanic tribe, had been displaced by the same Huns. They moved through Gaul and Spain before crossing into Africa. In 439 AD, they seized Carthage, the wealthiest city in the western provinces. Now they had a fleet and could attack from the sea. When the Vandals reached Rome in 455 AD, they faced no resistance. The emperor failed to organize a defense, and the citizens simply opened the gates. This led to one of the most brutal sacks in history. The word vandalism comes from these events. The Vandals stripped the city bare, taking vast amounts of gold, and even capturing the former Empress Licinia Eudoxia as a prisoner. 476 AD, the final blow. By this point, Rome barely controlled its own territories. Emperors were replaced every few years. The army was made up of mercenaries, and the economy had collapsed. The final blow came from Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain who deposed the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, in 476 AD. Symbolically, Odoacer sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople, signaling that the Western Roman Empire no longer existed. Why couldn't Rome defend itself? The empire was too vast. Romans could not control all its borders. Barbarians learned from Rome. They adopted Roman tactics, weapons, and armor. The Roman army weakened, legionnaires lost discipline, and mercenaries had no loyalty. Political infighting. Emperors fought each other more than they fought the barbarians. The barbarians did not simply destroy the empire, they built their own kingdoms on its ruins. Conclusion: the barbarian invasions were the final cause of the Western Roman Empire's fall. However, had Rome remained strong, it might have survived these attacks. In reality, the barbarians only finished what had already begun from within: decay, corruption, and military decline. In the end, Rome fell, but its legacy endured. Many barbarians adopted Roman culture, laws, and even religion. They did not erase Rome, they became its new masters. The final collapse of the empire. The final fall of the Roman Empire. How a great world order fell into chaos. For centuries, the Roman Empire was seen as unshakable. Its roads, laws, army, and culture created a sense of eternity. But no system, no matter how powerful, can avoid crises forever. In Rome's case, it was not just a crisis, it was the twilight of an entire civilization. The only question was when the final blow would come. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire existed more out of inertia than strength. All its old institutions, army, government, and economy were in decline. Cities were depopulated, borders were breached, and the central authority no longer controlled vast territories. Only the name remained. However, the fall of the empire did not happen overnight. It was a long process filled with intrigues, betrayals, defeats, and desperate attempts to save the remnants of a once great state. The division of Rome, the first step to collapse. A key moment in the decline of Western Rome was the division of the empire in 395 AD. Before his death, Emperor Theodosius V realized that governing such vast lands from a single center was impossible. So, he split the empire into two parts. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Ravenna, previously in Rome. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, with its capital in Constantinople. Formally, this was just an administrative decision, but in reality, it marked the beginning of the end for the West. While Byzantium survived, strengthened, and thrived for another 1,000 years, the Western Empire was trapped in a death spiral. Each year, its position weakened, the army turned into a band of mercenaries, the economy crumbled, and its enemies circled like vultures. The last attempts to save the empire, despite all its problems. The Western Roman Empire still had leaders who tried to save it. One of them was Flavius Aetius, one of the last great Roman generals, known as the Last Roman. Aetius understood that the Romans could no longer fight alone. He began negotiating with barbarian tribes, using one group against another. In 451 AD, he managed to stop Attila and the Huns at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, uniting Romans and barbarians. This was Rome's last great victory. However, just 2 years later, Aetius was assassinated on the orders of the weak Emperor Valentinian III. With Aetius gone, the empire lost its last true protector. No one could stop its decline anymore. 455 AD, the second sack of Rome. A few years after Aetius's death, a new nightmare struck Rome: the Vandals. The Vandals, one of the most brutal barbarian tribes, arrived from Africa and approached Rome. The city was defenseless. The army had vanished, the senators were powerless, and Emperor Petronius Maximus fled in disgrace. The Vandals entered Rome and began its destruction. They looted the city for 2 weeks, taking gold, destroying palaces, and leaving behind ruins. This event gave rise to the modern term vandalism. After this, Rome could no longer recover. It was a blow from which it would never rise again. The last emperor, and 476 AD after the sack of Rome, Western Roman emperors became mere puppets. They depended on barbarian warlords, lost control over provinces, and no longer commanded their armies. The last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was Romulus Augustulus, a young ruler who was little more than a symbolic figure. In 476 AD, the Germanic commander Odoacer seized power in Italy. He entered Rome and forced Romulus Augustulus to abdicate. This was the official end of the Western Roman Empire. Odoacer even sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, symbolizing that Roman rule in the West was over. Why did Byzantium survive while the West fell? Interestingly, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, survived for another 1,000 years. Why? Better governance. Byzantine emperors maintained strong control over the army and economy. Greater wealth. Byzantium controlled the richest regions of the empire: Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor. Constantinople's defenses. The city was protected by massive walls that no enemy could breach. In contrast, The Western Empire was consumed by chaos and lacked the resources to survive. What happened after 476 AD? The Western Roman Empire disappeared, but its legacy remained. New barbarian kingdoms arose on its former lands: France, England, Germany, Italy. The Church became the new center of power. The Pope assumed an imperial-like role. Barbarians adopted Roman traditions, even if in a simplified form. Interesting fact, despite Rome's fall, barbarian kings still called themselves Romans. They did not want to destroy Rome, they wanted to become its successors. Conclusion. The year 476 AD became a symbolic date, but Rome did not fall in a single day. It was a long process of internal decay, corruption, economic collapse, and external invasions. The empire could not survive corruption, betrayal, financial consequences of the fall of Rome. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD marked the division between antiquity and the Middle Ages. It reshaped the political, economic, and cultural landscape of Europe, influencing religion, science, and warfare. The consequences of this event were felt for centuries, and in many ways, still shape our world today. Let's explore the key effects of Rome's collapse. 1. The beginning of the Dark Ages in Europe. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, centralized authority disappeared. The world that the Romans had built over centuries shattered into fragments. Rome had governed its territories with a strong bureaucracy, a unified economy, an organized army, and a system of laws. After 476 AD, these mechanisms collapsed, and many regions of Europe fell into chaos. Barbarian kings failed to restore Rome's system of governance. Fact: this period, 5th and 9th centuries, is called the Dark Ages due to the decline of cities, trade, and knowledge. The decline of cities and trade. The Roman Empire thrived on a vast trade network and infrastructure. After its fall, trade routes became dangerous due to bandits and warlords. Cities were abandoned as they lost protection and access to goods. Roman roads deteriorated, bridges collapsed, and aqueducts stopped functioning. Fact: in Britain, after the Romans left, early 5th century, 90% of cities were abandoned. The decline of literacy and science. Rome had been a center of education and knowledge. Schools, libraries, and early universities thrived. Doctors, engineers, and lawyers carried on classical traditions. Philosophers and historians continued their intellectual work. After the empire's fall, most barbarians could neither read nor write. Many manuscripts were lost or destroyed. Classical knowledge survived mainly in monasteries. Literacy rates among Europeans plummeted. Fact: even powerful rulers like Charlemagne, 8th century, could barely read. 2. The rise of new kingdoms on Rome's ruins. Although the Roman Empire collapsed, new barbarian kingdoms emerged in its place. The Frankish kingdom, which later became France and Germany, Ostrogothic and Lombard kingdoms in Italy, the Visigothic kingdom in Spain, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in Britain. These new states preserved some Roman traditions, but relied more on military rule than bureaucracy. Fact: the Frankish kings, e.g. Clovis, adopted Christianity to strengthen their rule. 3. The influence of the Catholic Church and the rise of papal power. After Rome's fall, the Church became the primary unifying force in Europe. The empire could no longer maintain order, but the Church remained. The Pope became the spiritual leader not only of Christians, but also of barbarian kingdoms. Monasteries preserved books, knowledge, and Roman cultural traditions. Fact: by the 9th, the 10th centuries, the Pope wielded political power and even crowned kings, e.g. Charlemagne in 800 AD. Monasteries became centers of learning. Although Roman schools disappeared, monasteries continued teaching literacy, preserving Latin and classical knowledge. Fact: thanks to monks, the works of Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, and other philosophers were preserved. 4. The legacy of Roman law and ideas. Although Rome fell, its laws, architecture, and culture continued to shape the world. The Byzantine Empire preserved Roman law, Justinian's code. Latin remained the language of the church, medicine, and science. During the Renaissance, Europeans rediscovered Roman ideas, leading to new advancements. Fact: modern legal systems in Europe and Latin America are based on Roman law. 5. The Byzantine Empire, Rome's successor. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, continued for another 1,000 years. Its capital, Constantinople, became the wealthiest and most powerful city of the Middle Ages. Byzantines considered themselves true Romans and preserved Roman laws, military tactics, and culture. Fact: Byzantium survived until 1453, when it fell to the Ottoman Empire. 6. The revival of the Roman idea. In the Middle Ages, although Rome had fallen, its memory lived on. In 800 AD, Charlemagne proclaimed the creation of the Holy Roman Empire, which lasted until 1806. During the Renaissance, 15th to 16th centuries, Italians and Europeans revived Roman philosophy, architecture, and science. Fact: even Washington, D.C., USA, was built in Roman style, featuring columns, domes, and Latin inscriptions. Conclusion: the fall of the Roman Empire marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. Europe entered the Middle Ages, yet Rome's legacy endured. Greco-Roman culture was rediscovered in the Renaissance. Latin remained a key language in education and religion. Roman architecture and legal traditions continued to shape the world. Fact: Rome fell, but never died. Its influence lives on in modern laws, cities, roads, and even language. Conclusion: the fall of the Roman Empire and its legacy. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD was one of the most significant events in human history. It marked the end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages, reshaping the political, economic, and cultural landscape of Europe. Rome was not just a state, it was a civilization that left behind a colossal legacy. Its fall was the result of a long process of internal crisis, corruption, military decline, economic collapse, and barbarian invasions. However, this end also marked the beginning of a new world, what remained of Rome. Despite its collapse, Rome's influence endured. Law, Roman legal principles became the foundation of modern legal systems. Architecture and engineering, roads, aqueducts, arches, and domes continue to inspire builders. Language, Latin became the root of many modern languages. Culture and science, Roman knowledge was preserved in Byzantium and monasteries, surviving the Dark Ages. The idea of empire, many later states sought to revive Rome's power. The Holy Roman Empire, Byzantium, Napoleonic France, and even the USA. Rome fell, but it never died. The Roman Empire was too great to simply vanish. Its spirit lives on in our cities, laws, languages, and traditions. Though the Romans themselves are long gone, their ideas continue to shape the modern world. As British historian Edward Gibbon once said, "If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus."